We came to play today, we didn't come to perform.
Matt Jones to Sylvia. Kick smothered magnificently by Harvey. Again, Harvey tries it from mid-air. Nathan Jones dragged down. Dawes needs to pay his way. Howell bangs into his own man.
It's the way you prepare, it's the steeliness you take the ground with, it's the fight that you take the ground with, it's the resilience you take the ground with. A really poor day for us as a club.
Well, there have been some positives after the appointment of Neil Craig as the interim coach, but they evaporated on the weekend. The CEO, who's been charged by the AFL with rebuilding the Demons, who's been known as the Red Adair of the AFL, Mike. There's a problem, he comes in to fix it. Peter Jackson joins us on the couch. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Jared.
It was a tough weekend.
Yeah, it was tough, very tough. Not a great day for the club, but we'll come back harder and learn from it.
Peter, as a card-carrying member of the Melbourne Football Club, convince me that there's not this sense of hopelessness about the footy club as there was 6 weeks ago, 12 months ago.
Oh, look, it's not a hopeless situation, Mike, but I think from a personal point of view, not the result. The result was awful, but the letdown, I wasn't totally surprised by that. And I think the result also is symbolic of where Melbourne Football Club's been for the last 10 years. I think the guys have been on a very high emotional roll for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Positive emotion, but it's all been emotion. There's no real substance underneath it in terms of resilience as an AFL club and AFL players. And that, I just think that emotion was going to take its toll. They lifted really hard for the Sydney game. They came back in that second half. They could have been blown away in that second quarter. They battled hard against Geelong. They went up and played Brisbane. They fought hard, and I just think there was going to be a letdown, and it came. And North Melbourne have played some pretty good footy at stages this year, so it was always going to be how they came through. I think it's symbolic of the Melbourne Footy Club, though. I think my impressions when I first walked in there is that it's a football club, and that's what Craig is talking about when he says we came to play, not to perform. We came to play footy, have a game of footy. I think, I don't think the Melbourne Footy Club's understood what it takes to be a very strong, ruthless AFL professional sporting organisation, and these things happen when you're not like that.
We had Brock McLean here talking about why he left, and he mentioned about the tanking, and obviously became a big story, but how much of that losing mentality, which was ingrained in those players, and he said he left because of it, how much do you feel that they just accept it and that's just the way the club is? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Well, it's partly, Roosie. I think that, to do with Saturday, it was a culmination after 3 or 4, pretty good competitive efforts, honourable losses. One against the Western Bulldogs, fell over the line the last quarter. And sometimes at Melbourne that's almost good enough. And I heard you talking about Sydney before this, and we're light years away from that in terms of a culture. I don't think we've developed our players really well. I think over the journey, I've read some internal reports over the journey, and I get an instinct that we've relied on the draft picks we've got. We've had all these first round draft picks, and somehow that was going to get us through and turn us into a great footy club just because we had them. We haven't developed them very well. We haven't developed our players, and we haven't got leadership in the locker room. We made decisions 2, 3, 4 years ago that took the leadership out of the locker room, and now we've got. I know people criticise us for Jack Grimes and Jack Trengove, but they're there because they're the best we have. We haven't got that leadership group because we haven't developed it.
Peter, you've got to make some huge decisions in the next weeks or couple of months. One about the coach, one about the head of football.
Yep.
Let's deal with them individually. Here's the man, Paul Roos is the man you want to coach.
I got the contract.
Have you? Yeah, but have you abandoned any hope of getting Roosie?
Oh, look, in the conversations Roosie and I have had together, he's exactly the same as what he's said to everybody else. Hasn't said anything different to me to what he's different to you, that he doesn't think he's ready to coach yet.
But Lee Matthews said recently that you should persist and you should continue to badger him.
Like you do.
So is he still on your list?
Of course he's still on the list.
Because you've contacted Collingwood about Rodney Eade and Richmond about Mark Williams.
Yes.
And you're still harbouring some hope that Roosie might...
Well, of course he's on the list. Okay. He's here and he's not coaching. So until it's over, it's not over, is it?
So let's move on to the other appointment, which we believed you were hoping to announce a month or so ago. Where do you sit now with your football manager or your CEO of football?
I've made contact with quite a few people around the industry.
Jeff Walsh included?
Yeah, I called Walshy last week. I mean, he and I go a long way back, obviously, two old blokes from the AFL. And I called him. And the interesting thing about listening to the media's response to Jeff is no one seems to take people's comments on face value. They don't take Roosy's comment on face value. They think there's some other reason Walshy left Collingwood. They don't take it on face value. But listening to him and talking to him, it reminded me a bit of myself in the last year at Essendon. You know, when you're in this game for too long, it's a tough game and it's pressures all the time, the scrutiny. You know, little things start to really bug you, and things that 2 or 3 years ago didn't matter now start to really sort of piss you off. And he sounded a bit like that. And I just think he needs a break. Now, how long that break's going to be...
When he's refreshed, if he were to say to you, yes, I'm receptive to an offer to go to Melbourne, would you offer him the job?
I'd have to consider it. Of course I would, with his track record. We'll catch up for lunch in a couple of weeks. He's promised me that, and we'll see how he is. But I don't know how...
But there's no arrangement in place at the moment?
No. I mean, if I take him at face value, there's no arrangement with Hawthorn either. So everyone tries to read these things into it, but I just take him on face value. I just think after 28 years non-stop, he wanted a break. Now, how long's that break going to be? I don't know.
Peter Spargo is currently the president. He's been pretty low profile, but he's been a great servant over many years for the club. You added Glenn Bartlett to the board in recent times.
Well, I didn't. The board did.
The board did, but we know you're pulling the strings and you don't get on the board unless you go bang with the rubber stamp.
No, that's not right. I mean, I need to clear that up. I mean, the AFL... Sorry, the media, AFL media, has made me the administrator of Melbourne Football Club.
The AFL made you that?
No, the AFL did not appoint me, Mike.
They didn't appoint you?
No, the board of the Melbourne Football Club appointed me.
Under
the only thing that happened is Andrew Demetrio called me and asked me, they were looking for a new CEO. He said, I reckon you ought to get someone with experience. Peter Jackson's around. I'll give him a ring first to make sure he's interested. He rang me, said, don't know, give me 24 hours, Andrew. So I rang back and I said, look, yeah, I'll do it interim basis. Now, I was appointed CEO. I'm not an administrator on behalf of the AFL. I work for the Melbourne Football Club and I work for their board.
So are you reporting to Peter Spargo and the board?
Yes,
or
of course I am.
Are you reporting to Andrew Demetrio and Gillon McLaughlin, back to the board?
We keep the AFL informed. I don't report to Andrew and Gillon at all. But we keep them informed. Right now, we're heavily dependent on them. So, of course, of course I'm going to talk to them. OK,
so take us through the process of the club deciding who the next president is. If you're saying you're not going to have a major input into it, who decides whether Alan Stockdale challenges and who decides whether Glenn Bartlett gets elected? And if Alan Stockdale does challenge and there's a potential takeover, are you still going to be there?
Alan Stockdale decides whether he challenges. That's his democratic right under the constitution of the Melbourne Football Club. The AFL, in terms of the support it's going to provide the Melbourne Football Club, has the right to consider the composition of the board, including the chairman. They want to get that right. So they're involved in that selection of that chairman. After that, it's a nomination subcommittee which includes 2 directors of the Melbourne Football Club and a representative of the AFL. And there's 25, 30 names, people who've put their hand up or been recommended. We'll go through a process over the next weeks and months to put together a new board.
Peter, talking about names, I'll give you some of these names. Lyon, Longmire, Clarkson, Chris Scott and Hinkley, all untried coaches. The broad view is that you won't take a risk on an untried coach because of what's happened previously. Could Alan Richardson be in the mix at Melbourne?
Look, where the club is right now and where the members and supporters are right now and the sponsors, you know, we've got not much to sell except hope. Is that fair enough? I mean, we've got to show we can make solid decisions and sell hope and then put some real development into the playing list over the next 1 and 2 years. That's on and off the field development in my view. And we've got to get a coach that knows what he's doing. I don't believe we can take a risk on an untried coach. I think we've got to go for an experienced one.
Despite the history of all those blokes who have been in the system and come on and been very, very good at AFL.
I understand that. But there's a couple of guys out there who have a pretty good track record.
We're talking about Rodney Eade and Mark
I mean, they've got a pretty good track record. And Rosie.
And you.
but they have. I mean, there's circumstances that led to them being terminated from their position. But if why those circumstances, we'll find that out. We'll do the due diligence. Had they been in the club too long, what was the situation within the clubs? I don't know, but you just take their performance on face value. It's a damn good track record, both of them.
Can I ask you about scapegoats? Because Chris Connolly has been a great Melbourne person. He's been embroiled in a situation where he's essentially been the only one to take a fall for the tanking issue. He's suspended, from my understanding, by the club and left in limbo. What's his position, and is there a future for Chris Connolly there? Because the club to get to go forward surely needs some people with a bit of blue and red in their system.
There's a couple of comments to that. I mean, I don't know Chris Connolly very well. I think I've met him once or twice over the journey. Anything that we do with the structure of the football club has got nothing to do with personalities or personal issues. I've got to put a structure in place that makes sense and lets the football club break even next year on having 1, 2 or 3 games in a year. Now that's not an easy task to do, and we've got to do that without compromising football, because we must get we will only be a great football club again when we've got a great football team. And I think if Melbourne's done something wrong over the last 10 years, it sort of hasn't quite understood the importance of football to being a great football club. That's why I talk about in the culture and the developing the players. So that's my primary aim, is to put a football structure in place which isn't inhibited by cost cutting or anything like that. And so any decisions we make will be about the structure and the ability of the club to pay. One of the things I would say about the Melbourne club at the risk of, upsetting a few people, is I think sometimes, Gerard, the club's gone back to too many people who have got red and blue. I think sometimes we don't have a propensity in this club to bring in the best from outside. There's lots of very good football clubs. There's 2 great clubs at the moment, Geelong and Sydney, and they've got all the culture and all the history. We've got to find people that know how to build those sort of environments and those sort of cultures to make Melbourne great. And I think if that could be a criticism levelled at the Melbourne Footy Club. I know I'm being harsh, because there's a lot of people put some fantastic effort and emotional contribution into the club, but we have to get really good people.
Well, you've got some big appointments to make and a couple of huge decisions to go through over the next few months, Peter. We've run out of time. You've got plenty, I know, but we do appreciate you joining us, and let's hope you get it right.
Thanks very much, Gerard. Thank you.
Peter Jackson, CEO of the Demons. Time for a break. More to come on the other side of the break.